These mini lectures will wrap up chapter 32 and will leave us with one more chapter to go. Hard to believe. Just as a reference again, I'm putting up our Module 4 overview and our Module 4 objectives below. We're going to pick up with the movement of regionalism. This is a movement of naturalistic, modern US American art during the 1930s and 40s. Artists of the regionalist movement shunned the city life and rapidly developing technological advances to create scenes of rural life. The so-called regionalist triumvirate of artists include Grant Wood of Iowa, Thomas Hart Benton, who worked in Missouri, and John Stuart Curry, who worked in Kansas. Now, the larger historical context here is the Great Depression of the 1930s and 40s. And, during this time of great economic instability, regionalist art was widely appreciated for its reassuring images of the American heartland, whether those images were accurate or not. And the most famous of the regionalist works is Grant Wood's American Gothic. Regionalism shares interest in figuration with other movements like social realism that we'll talk about with Diego Rivera and Ben Shahn here momentarily. But unlike the kind of social progressive agenda of social realism, regionalism promoted xenophobia and conservatism. It was a rearguard battle against the kind of internationalism, against the abstraction and high modernism of the avant-garde, and it was a chauvinistic praise of the virtues of a disappearing image of America. It's comparable in many ways to the socialist realism in the Soviet Union and the return to realism in the art of the Third Reich in Germany. Wood had traveled to Europe and studied Northern Renaissance masters, people like Jan van Eyck, Roger van der Weyden, Albrecht Dürer. He was not interested in modernism and the avant-garde when he went to Europe. He liked the glazing techniques done in oil paints and the same meticulous detail of those early masters. As the story goes, we see here the two sitters in this portrait are the artist's sister and his dentist. But their relationship to each other, what's presented here is unclear. Are they a married couple? There seems to be an age difference. Is this the father protecting the purity of his daughter? In the background, we see the farmhouse that is actually a craftsman house. This back in this era, you could order kits from the Sears catalog that came with all the materials to build your own house. And the Sears catalog craftsman homes, this really embraced the notion of American self-sufficiency. There's many of these Sears catalog homes in different areas of the US still today. And when this work was first shown in Chicago, it really confirmed the image that city folks had of the country as conservative, stern, and unfriendly. I mean, look at these, welcoming faces that we see here. And it actually, Grant Wood's American Gothic actually at first made the country folks really mad. Thomas Hart Benton is another of the major representatives of realism, and he is the teacher of Jackson Pollock, who we will discuss later when we turn to abstract expressionism after World War II. So here in this regionalist work, we see a visual depiction of a ballad. The ballad is called The Jealous Lover of the Lone Green Valley, and it's a happy, uplifting story that is acted out behind the musicians. I know this is recorded and it's hard to hear sarcasm, but I'm joking because this story is actually pretty horrific. A wife admits to her husband that she's been unfaithful. And the law of the country, the law of the rural folk goes that he needs to teach her a lesson and murder her. So we see that playing out in the background with the musicians here in the front. So we have that kind of visual and auditory impression. Just to make things more complicated here, we've talked about socialist realism in the Soviet Union. We've talked about regionalism. And now we are going to talk about social realism. All three of these isms reflect a turn to naturalism in painting. Social realism, though, unlike regionalism, infuses its work with a new sense of social consciousness. It depicts the harsh realities of the working classes, and social realist painters like Ben Shahn or Diego Rivera, they sought to record what they saw and experienced in contemporary life. Many of these artists had leftist political leanings, and we'll see that in Ben Shahn's work, The Passion of Sacco and Vanzetti. Sacco and Vanzetti were Italian immigrants and involved in anarchist political circles. They took part in a robbery in which somebody was killed. They were imprisoned in 1921 and executed in 1927. And it was widely believed at the time that they were not actually responsible for the murder. And this kind of scapegoating of immigrants and scapegoating of leftists became a rally cry for the left during a time of severe crackdown and political censorship. The judge in the courtroom in the back of this painting, that is a portrait of the actual judge who presided over the case. And we see three figures here in the foreground around the coffins of Sacco and Vanzetti. They are also portraits of the committee members who investigated the case and kind of swiftly found these two immigrants guilty. Now, this was painted for an exhibition of mural art that was held at the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, in New York City, which was a very new museum at the time. Before the exhibit opened, a collector offered Shahn to buy the work for an extremely large amount of money, really exorbitant. And Shahn actually said no, because the offer was, as Shahn had rightly guessed, it was the collector actually wanted to get the painting out of the show. He did not like the political message that was introduced here. But Diego Rivera really was inspired by Shahn's work, and he was very interested in how Shahn fused social content and modernist but naturalistic form. And we see Rivera carry that out in works like his Man at the Crossroads, his Man at the Crossroads mural here that was done at the Rockefeller Center. Now, Rivera, like Grant Wood, had traveled extensively through Europe, but focused more on the avant-garde. He met Picasso and Braque in Paris, but he also did travel to Italy and studied famous Renaissance frescoes. He returns to Mexico in 1929, and while he had been gone, Pancho Villa and Zapata had led a social agrarian revolution in Mexico. And so Rivera joins up with this new progressive Mexican government. He then does a series of large-scale murals in Mexico, establishes himself, and then gets a commission from one of the biggest capitalist families, the Rockefellers, to create a mural for them at the Radio City of America building. And they gave Rivera the theme, Man at the Crossroads, with hope and high vision. Of course, the Rockefellers wanted Rivera to portray a kind of capitalist, kind of entrepreneurial vision, but Rivera had a very different idea. And we see Rivera here working in situ on this large mural. But let's take a look. So, spoiler alert, it was never finished at the RCA building, but instead, after work was halted there, for reasons I'll explain later, he completes the mural at the Palacio de Bellas Artes in Mexico City at the request of the government there. So what was so problematic? Why did the Rockefellers not approve of this image? Well, in the center, we see this male figure who's kind of dressed in the clothes of the working class, the soldier, the farmer. And then the composition is divided on either side. So on the left, we see the chaos of capitalism. We have police beating workers with batons, the police brutality, and police institutionalized violence is not something that is unique to our own era, unfortunately. We see the elites here, kind of yucking it up, enjoying themselves, completely oblivious to the chaos and violence that swirls around them. And we have this kind of big menacing Zeus with his thunderbolt in the corner. On the right, then, we see the harmony of socialism. There's people of all different skin pigments. There are athletes, everybody, men, women, everybody coming together. And we see Lenin, here's the detail, Lenin with this multi-ethnic, diverse group, clasping together their hands in solidarity. Very favorable view of socialism. And this is exactly what Rockefeller did not like. He insisted that Lenin be removed. Rivera said no. There were huge debates. There were demonstrations, people picketing on both sides outside of the RCA building. So essentially, Rockefeller and Rivera got to this impasse, and the work was destroyed in the RCA. Rivera returned to Mexico and recreated this mural, as I said, in the Palacio de Bellas Artes. And he included an important addition of Rockefeller here amongst the kind of fat cat elites. And what many saw with this controversy is that it represented another way the U.S. was moving closer to isolationism, but not just isolationism, but also fascism in the early 1930s.